Hello, Yetil, welcome back. This is lesson 2 from week 4. So we're looking at today of what did nurses use when we're talking about the Crimean War. So we're going to talk to you, Teddy. What did we discuss last lesson? Have a real good think about what the nurses did for the soldiers when we're talking about the Crimean War. Think about not only what they did, but maybe what did they use. So, one of the things that we mentioned was they would clean and help heal the wounds. So soldiers would come back from the battlefield. They would potentially have been shot or they've been cut. They've got horrible bruises and they needed someone to clean them up and then cover up the wound to help it heal. So we said that they did this by covering and they keep it clean. However, one of the things that we mentioned didn't have any plasters, and that's because they weren't invented. So what did they use? So using the last experiment as a way of helping us guess. If you've not done the last experiment yet, you need to have done that, and then you need to follow these videos in order. So using the last experiment, we can estimate, we can have a guess at what we've found so far. It must have been some sort of fabric that they've used, as the other materials that we tested, they didn't absorb water, or in this case, it would have been blood as well. So it must have been some sort of fabric. And this meant that the other materials couldn't be used because they wouldn't soak up that blood. So you couldn't put a plastic bottle round a soldier's arm. Not only do a plastic not invented, so it couldn't have been that, but it wouldn't have gone round their arm and soaked up any of the blood. So that would have been useless. So let's look at what was available. It would have been cotton bandages. So they used cotton bandages as a way to help the healing process for the soldier. But why did they use cotton? Well, cotton was quite common as it comes from a flower, and you can see here this is a flower that produces its seeds, and as part of its seeds it also produces the off part, which is the cotton. So that you pick the cotton, you de-seed it, and it goes through a big process to then become the cotton bandages or the cotton sheets that they'd use for the bedding. So it was quite common. It also has lots of very, very tiny holes in. Now, why do we think the tiny holes would be important? Well, if you're thinking the wound, if you're going to wrap it really, really tight and stop things from getting in, that works very well. You're not going to let any bad germs in. You're not going to get any dirt into that wound. So that's brilliant. But you're also not going to let in any oxygen. And with no oxygen getting to the wound, it's going to heal a lot slower. And it might actually get infected in a different way because you're trapping in a lot of the moisture. So the tiny, tiny little holes lets out any of the bad germs that need to kind of get out, but it also stops any from getting in. So with these tiny holes, you can tell that what's happening is, as the bad germs try and get in, the bandage would be on their arm, and what it would do is it would stop the germs from getting in because there'd be lots of tiny little holes over the top of each other they wouldn't be able to get through, or if they did get through, not as many would be getting through. And it also allows in the oxygen, and it's that oxygen that really helps speed up the healing process. But one of the most important things about cotton was that it could be boiled. And what this meant was the soldiers would sleep in the cotton beds, in the bedding. They would use the cotton bandages for if they had a head injury or if they'd been shot and they needed something to bandage it up on their arms or their legs or anything like that. But after they'd finished with it, well, it would be a waste to throw that all away. We've got more soldiers coming in. We need to look after them as well. So what they did was they found out that cotton could actually be boiled at a very high temperature in hot boiling water without it changing its shape. It was able to keep its shape and go back to how it was normally without it losing its stretchiness or its squishiness or how you could twist and bend it. And it also meant that because you could boil it, it would kill a lot of the germs that were sat on that cotton bedding, meaning that the next soldier that used it wouldn't have the germs from the previous wounded soldier. And that's why it was so important. Now you can see here from this picture that I've got of it's a drawing of Florence Nightingale with her lamp. She's going round doing her rounds in the evening, and you can see that all these men that are in bed at the minute, and you can see every single one of them would have a sheet that would go on the bottom of the bed. They'd then have like a cover, and on the cover you'd have a cotton sheet on that as well. And then you've got the pillows, which would also have a cotton sheet on. And then you've also got men like this man here, who've got an injured head. So he's got a bandage round his head to stop any of the blood or any of the germs from getting in. But it means that after he's used that, if somebody else comes in with a head injury, you don't want to have to make a new bandage or wait for a new bandage to come in. So what you could do is you could use this one again, but you'd have to make sure it was boiled washed from the previous person. Now, what a cotton bandage looks like is this, and I will get you a nice close-up view of it so you can see. So this is what a cotton bandage looks like. So what it would be is it'd be a stretchy material, and it would only stretch one way. You wouldn't need it to stretch the other, but it'd be a stretchy material that you'd be able to stretch all the way around. And then, I'm not sure if you'd be able to see, if I hold this nice and close, can you see how you can actually see my silhouette? You can see me a little bit through if I hold it up to the camera. Well, that's because it's got these tiny, tiny little holes in, just like I said on the video, and that's letting in the oxygen, but making sure that the germs are not getting in as well. So it's enough protection so the oxygen can get in, but not wide enough holes so the germs and the dirt can get in. Now, one of the things that we found out that the nurses would use these, they realised that it was actually quite difficult to do it yourself, because you could wrap it round, but then it's not very straight, that, and then I'd need to pin it because it's not sticky. Look, not sticky, not like a plaster. So you'd need to get an actual pin like this, and you'd have to pin it on yourself, and you'd have to pin the material to another part of the material so it folds over so that you can secure the bandage. Now, one of the things that we found out is that plasters didn't exist, so this was actually quite difficult to do yourself. You really required somebody to make sure that it was on tight so that nothing could get in, but you also made sure that if you didn't want to pin yourself with a needle, so you needed to make sure that if you were weak and you've got this wound, you needed a nurse really to dress it. Whereas now, if you've got an injury on your knee, you could put a plaster on yourself and you wouldn't need maybe an adult to help you. But back then, you needed a nurse to dress your wound, because otherwise you could end up dressing it wrong and you'd do more damage to it by letting in keeping in the moisture rather than letting the moisture out, but keeping the air in. So it's very difficult. So now that we've found out about bandages, we're going to continue our experiment. What we're going to do is we're going to, using the same experiment materials that you used in the previous session, you're now going to test them. So a bandage not only needs to be absorbent, but as we showed you there, it needs to be able to be moved. You need to be able to move it, and it needs to be malleable. So that's a really good word. You might turn your turn, malleable. Malleable. And that means that you can change the shape of it without breaking it. So I want you to try, and with your objects that you've got, I want you to twist them. I want you to bend them. I want you to squash them and stretch them. And the reason that we're testing this is because bandages, they need to be put anywhere on your body. So you might need to twist, you might need to bend, you might need to squash and stretch them, and they might need to be moved at different parts of your body. If you can't do that with an object, maybe that wouldn't be the best bandage. So we're going to try that out. Have a test with some of your objects, see which ones can twist, bend, squash and stretch, and see which ones definitely can't. I look forward to seeing you in the final session. Thank you very much for coming to this one. Goodbye, you two.